My name is Dylan, and I have been telling street stories for over 15 years. I usually talk to the kids or young adults who are at risk of drug abuse and peer pressure. I start off with a series of fast-paced escapades, which lead some kids into changing their traditional playground of gangs into something positive. My stories follow their adventures from selling or using drugs and alcohol. This helped them to become entrepreneurs, choreographers, and songwriters. Also sports managers, and military special forces, even investigative detectives. Raw Productions, Reach Out and Witness Productions presents Hoodzville Rap. Written and produced by Larry W. Keys. This movie is about peer pressure and its consequences. Some people never have to go through it. But there are some who go through it and wish they didn't have to. It takes all types of people to become a role model, depending on the situation, time, and age. The setting, plot, and characters of this movie have been chosen by circumstances of living in a drug-infested city. I'm not here to glorify the situation but only to identify the situation. Because it's one thing to live it and another to survive it. My name is Dylan. Hello Chuck and Jana. I'm here to tell you stories about the hood. If you want to be a gangster, your parents should drop you off in Baltimore, New York, D.C. or Cali for 24 hours to see how gangster you are. Places where some guys don't want to be. But they have to be, because of their circumstances. I'm going to tell you stories about how some role models become who they are. Here in Hoodzville, Jim and Brian deal with peer pressure, crime, and drugs. There are so many lost souls in their world that they not knowing was searching for their soul. At age 16, drugs, fear, and pain was important. It was a hell of a game they played and it was for real. They had to earn their respect early in life from others. They didn't just wake up, buy a pistol, and decide they was going to sell pills, cocaine, or dope. It's one thing to live it, another to survive it. They weren't bad kids. Jim had brains and ambitions. He wasn't afraid of anything. At one point in his life all things were possible, good or bad. When Jim was younger, he and his brother used to go to the movies together. As they stood in line to get their tickets, Jim saw two guys walk up to them. Mickey, Jim's brother, would look them up and down as they went to the next person after they were looking at Mickey and Jim. Mickey didn't like holding Jim's hands, so Jim didn't like holding hands either. Jim said, "What them guys look at us like that for?" Mickey said, "They're the Unger brothers, and they beat people up like you for fun." Jim took a long swallow and peeped over his shoulder up the line. He saw one of the Unger brothers hit one guy in the face, and went in his pockets and took his money while his brother twisted his arm. Then the guy hauled tail home. Then, the two guys walked on up the line staring at people up and down, trying to intimidate each person they stood in front of. Jim pulled on Mickey's shirt sleeve and whispered because he didn't want the guys next to him to hear. "Hey Mickey. You my brother, right?" Mickey looked down at Jim and said, "Yeah Jim." Jim said, "Hey Mickey, you wouldn't leave me behind if one of those guys tried to hit you, would you?" Mickey turned around and looked down at him and said in a firm voice, "Nah. Jim, I couldn't do that to you, man." Then Mickey smiled at Jim. Jim rarely ever saw Mickey smile. He was always so serious out there in the streets all the time. Just like when the Unger brothers looked him up and down, he looked them back up and down. He was always so confident in throwing hands. By the time they had got to the ticket booth, Jim saw two fights. Some tried to fight back. Somebody actually fought them back, but, of course, with 2 against 1 they lost. Jim asked Mickey, "Why those guys keep running from those two?" Mickey said, "Jim, they practice fighting every day." When Jim thought about it, he said, "They must be good, huh?" Mickey just looked down at Jim and nodded his head and said, "You see Jim, if you practice all the time at something you will be good at it someday. This just happened to be their day." That day, Jim made up his mind that he was going to be the one doing the fighting and not doing the running. But, he didn't know that his mouth could get his butt in trouble. As Jim got older he had a buddy named Chink. They were real tight, and they did everything together. It didn't start out like that, because Jim's mouth was like a two-edged sword, it often got him in trouble. Jim and Chink first got tight over a fight. They fought because of his mouthing off at Chink's little sister. Jim had hurt his leg playing, he had stitches in his right knee so it was bandaged up. While in the playground one day Jim told Chink's sister to get off the sliding board so he could slide down. She said, "No. I'm gonna tell my brother if you tell me that again." Jim said, "So what, go tell your brother and get off the sliding board." Then she got up and hauled home to tell her brother what Jim said. Jim thought to himself, "I don't care, so go get him." He was clenching his fist, and then it dawned on him that he was handicapped. "Oh shucks," he said to himself. Fear ran across his mind, and here comes Chink across Susan's mother yard. He couldn't back out of the situation now. Then Jim thought that maybe if he explained to Chink that his leg was hurting, then maybe he could get out of the situation, at least until his leg heals. Jim was quite sure that Chink would consider this as a peace offering. As Jim was thinking all that, Chink was getting closer and closer to him, and the expression on his face let Jim know that he was going to try to mess him up. When Chink got close enough he said, "You messing with my sister, man?" "That's a serious offense," Jim said. "Yeah, what about it?" Before he could finish his sentence something went, pow, right in Jim's face. So Jim closed one eye and started swinging. Chink was swinging forward and Jim was swinging and limping backwards. If it wasn't for Rooster breaking them up, Chink would have really kicked Jim's butt. They have been tight ever since that day. As the years went on, Jim realized from the fight game that a choice of youngsterhood was driven in his mind out of fear. Back then they had a choice of being a punk, chump, or a badass, which was a youngster in Hoodzville. The slyness was released from within him along with scheming and conniving. This combination blinded him to the innocence and goodness of the world. It seemed that he had to go with the flow and was willing to, because of the consequences he also had to be true to the game. He started out with the sly, later he hung with the slick, and then he dwelled with the wicked. Everywhere he turned there was no peace in his direction among the kids that he was surrounded by in Hoodsville. He couldn't get out if he wanted to, because he was in too deep. The power he possessed for evil doings, the laughter of hurt and pain were hardened by the years gone by, and he was at such a young age. Jim's family moved from around the way projects to an apartment complex. They have made it out of the projects but wouldn't stay out of the projects. This was before his mother's drug habit was bad. His father had a reputation for fighting and his mom was a good looker. His pops would fight at the drop of a dime, which kept him ducking the police from an old warrant for attempt manslaughter on a drug dealer for selling drugs to his wife. Their father kept a job because he was good at fixing cars, and there was plenty of work for an unlicensed mechanic in Hoodsville. After they moved from around the way, their mother used to say that Mickey and Jim ran with some bad boys. 'Cause around the school way was the happenings. Jim learned so much stuff that he didn't even want to go back and visit around his old way. People were so advanced on getting high and fighting that he started to fit right in real well. Around his old way they used to play catch a girl and get a kiss or a roll. You hug and grind on a girl. There were so many different girls around the school way. Slick ones, sly ones, but around his old way the girls always played hard to get. Jim always wanted to be a youngster when he was younger because you had to be just at the ripe old age of 13. This had prepared him to be a gangster when he turned 16. So, he was setting up his plan to take over Hoodsville earlier than some others who wanted to be a youngster. Growing up in this environment he grew up in wasn't no rose garden. Living in fear of others taking your toys, money, even your girlfriend was no joke. It could happen to anyone who wasn't on top of their game. He had a choice, to accept it, or reject it. Without even knowing the change within himself, or recognizing the challenges that were about to reveal themselves, he plunged head-on into the 12-year-old syndrome. So it was like Get on your mark, get set, ready, go. Jim drifted to the down the hill crowd. It was rough and also devastating to Jim, because he soon lost his dog King to a hit-and-run driver. He lost focus in school. He was on the verge of failing for lack of concentration, and his brother Mickey was doing 6 months in Boys Village for being in gang fights. He was a member of the apartment boys. At age 11 Jim was sniffing glue, and at age 12 he was drinking wine with the older guys, around the schoolway. They had connections on how to buy some wine from the store. By the time he was 13 he was taking pills. The pill high that he was trying to stay away from finally caught up with him through the power of peer pressure once again. He couldn't talk to his friends, they were all high and nodding. He thought he was too smart to fall into that trap. But, at a dance one night he felt like a fly trapped in a spider web. He wound up taking one yellow jacket, pill, downer, and didn't feel it. So, the cool guy that he is decided to take another one, and that was the one that messed him up. He was finally high off of pills. Listen up now, here we go. Hanging out with the down the hill crowd, sniffing glue, and around crap games with TJ, Brian, Mike, and Ty was alright until they sniffed so much glue that each one of them used to go into a dream. A state of mind in which the high would overpower their movements, and they would be paralyzed for a minute or two. A buzz would get really loud, like a heartbeat, as the bag opened and closed while breathing the glue in and out. It would sound like an echo, and the people faces around them would look mighty funny. They either laughed back to reality or passed out right there where they stood. The more they sniffed, the more they tried to reach that dream state of mind. One day Jim and Brian were in the woods sniffing glue, then Brian went into a dream and kept laughing. He was laughing while he was in the bag and kept on laughing, not sniffing but just laughing. Now, how stupid is that, Chuck? Seriously, Chuck, how stupid is that, since you keep laughing? So then Jim snatched the bag and he kept on laughing too. Then they start walking towards the opening of the woods to get out of there. The bag was being passed between them and both of them laughed. At what? No one will ever know, and passed the bag back and forth. They didn't care who saw them at this point. They walked past the greenhouse. That's where the maintenance men kept their tools, water hoses, and other stuff. There was this old man knocked out on the greenhouse steps. It seems to them like the man was drunk as a skunk. Jim and Brian looked at the man as they ran by, then they laughed at him. All of a sudden they spotted a fifth of Thunderbird on the steps right next to him. Then they looked at each other and laughed at the man. Not to glorify their actions but, only to identify the danger of it. You do know that your brain will be damaged from this, right? Then looked at each other and burst out laughing at each other. Brian said, in between laughs, "Let's yoke the boy." Jim said, "Let's get the wine." Ha ha ha, they both laughed at the same time. Then Brian grabbed the bag and started sniffing glue again. Jim snatched the bag and sniffed and looked at the man with his beady little eyes, from sniffing so much glue, and when Brian snatched the bag back from him Jim took off running. He headed straight for the greenhouse steps full speed ahead, and snatched up the fifth of Thunderbird bottle. Brian was dead on his heels laughing his ass off. He stopped and looked at the man and then ran over to him and kicked the man on the leg as if expecting the man to get up and chase them. Jim looked over his shoulder, to see if the man got up as they were running back across the green hill to the woods, in another direction by the projects. As they ran and laughed and looked at each other laughing with one hand holding a bag. They stopped when they were deep enough in the woods and started drinking and sniffing glue. As each of them vomited and cried and the others laughed, they walked out the woods like nothing was wrong because all the glue and wine was gone. They got messed up that day, but, for Jim, after too many close call situations of getting high, Jim used to get high earlier in the daytime. By the time he went in the house at night he was sober enough, or at least halfway sober, to walk straight. One time he got caught. His mom thought she had smelled some alcohol on his breath. Even though she was drinking and weren't sure, he got punished anyway. While being in the house on punishment, Jim began playing his drums that he had gotten on his 12th birthday. Jim played his drums more often, and that punishment day, he was on a drum roll. All of a sudden he went into a dream state of mind from a combination of pills and glue he had earlier. That's how he knew that his mother was wrong about the alcohol. Since Mickey was always outside or in juvie, Jim common sense kicked in between drum beats. He was in the school books because of boredom. It took the drums and punishments to slow him down enough to really learn how to read, write, and do math. Jim was too busy earlier in school to actually learn those things that he would need for his future in this world. He used to show off in school, fake it till you make it. On Fridays and Saturdays Jim and some others used to walk down the bottom of the hill drinking their wine, looking for a party. The hardest part was getting all of them in. They used to stand on the corner and divide up. 2 of them would go in first, 5 minutes later, 3 more got in, and then 2 more. Once they got in, they all would meet in a corner somewhere and scope out the girls. One party they went to was popping, banging, tight. That's enough for today. I'll see you tomorrow.
Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight. Lift up your head, hold it up high, high. We need your love in order to survive. Cause on my block kids are selling dope, 11, 12, and 13. Some say their manhood will never be seen. Try to talk to them, you look like you're crazy. Some to get through to, and some are just lazy. They leave their young girlfriend for habits of babies. To be behind bars is just plain crazy. Doing drugs in the street and not enough to eat. They lie and steal, it's no big deal. Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight.